A man at the top of his game with a world of wealth at his fingertips decides to treat his young mistress to a weekend of unparalleled luxury. He books the presidential suite at the Grand Elysian, the city's most exclusive 5-star hotel, a monument to old money and power. He thought he had it all planned, a perfect escape, a secret kept safe within soundproof walls. He believed his quiet, dutiful wife, a woman he saw as little more than a beautiful ornament for his home, would be none the wiser. But he made one fatal mistake, one colossal miscalculation. He chose the wrong hotel. He walked into his mistress's arms for a weekend of sin, not realizing he was walking straight into the heart of his wife's kingdom and straight towards his own spectacular ruin. Richard Sterling adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection staring back at him from the polished obsidian of his corner office window. 45 floors below the city sprawled like a circuit board, a complex network of power and money that he, Richard Sterling, Senior Vice President of Sterling and Finch Capital, had mastered. He was a king surveying his domain. His suit was bespoke, Savile Row. The watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, and the car waiting for him downstairs was a midnight blue Rolls-Royce Ghost. These were not just possessions. They were affirmations of his success, testaments to his ruthless climb up the corporate ladder. His life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. His penthouse on Park Avenue was a feature in architectural magazines. His 2 children were enrolled at the most exclusive private schools money could buy. And then there was his wife, Victoria. Beautiful, elegant, from a good family, though one he always privately considered old money, new poverty. She was the perfect corporate spouse. She ran the household with quiet efficiency, hosted flawless dinner parties, and never questioned his late nights at the office. For 15 years she had been a constant, predictable, and if he were honest with himself, rather boring part of his perfect life. He saw her as a valuable asset, like a blue-chip stock that paid reliable if unexciting dividends. A discreet knock on the mahogany door pulled him from his reverie. "Come in," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. The door opened to reveal Jessica Monroe. She was 26, with eyes the color of whiskey and a mane of honey-blonde hair that tumbled over her shoulders. She was a junior analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department, sharp enough to be interesting but not so ambitious as to be a threat. She was in every way the antithesis of Victoria. Where Victoria was classic elegance and quiet reserve, Jessica was vibrant, demanding, and thrillingly transparent in her admiration for his power and wealth. She closed the door softly behind her, a playful smirk on her lips. "All set for this weekend, boss?" she purred, leaning against his desk. The scent of her expensive perfume, a gift from him, filled the air. "Everything is arranged to perfection," Richard said, a self-satisfied smile gracing his own lips. He walked over to her, placing his hands on her waist. "The presidential suite at the Grand Elysian. Champagne on ice, a private dinner reservation at La Saphir, and a weekend where your only job is to enjoy yourself." Jessica's eyes widened. "The Grand Elysian, Richard, that place is legendary. I thought it was impossible to get a suite there on short notice." "For most people it is," he said, enjoying the look of awe on her face. "But the name Sterling still opens doors, my dear. I made one call to the concierge, mentioned a potential corporate account, and they practically rolled out the red carpet." He felt a familiar surge of pride. This was his power, the ability to bend the world to his will with a single phone call. He had told Victoria he was flying to Zurich for an emergency banking conference. It was the perfect lie, plausible, important sounding, and requiring him to be completely out of touch. He had even packed a briefcase with fake financial reports, a piece of theatre he found amusing. Victoria had packed his suitcase for him, as she always did, her expression placid and unquestioning. She had even reminded him to take his blood pressure medication. The irony was delicious. And Victoria? Jessica asked, her voice a soft whisper, a hint of insecurity clouding her features. Richard waved a dismissive hand. She believes I'll be negotiating with Swiss bankers all weekend. She's probably planning her schedule for the charity gala or discussing flower arrangements with the gardener. Her world is small, contained. She wouldn't suspect a thing. He truly believed it. Victoria lived in a gilded cage he had built for her. She had her charities, her luncheons, her book club with other society wives. He funded it all, of course, providing her with a generous allowance that kept her comfortable, and he assumed content. He had convinced himself that her lack of ambition was a sign of her satisfaction, not a sign of something hidden. She was a relic, a beautiful woman from a bygone era, who didn't understand the blood and sweat of modern ambition. She had no idea how the real world worked, the world he dominated. "Good," Jessica breathed, relaxing into his embrace. "I want you all to myself." "You will," he promised, kissing her deeply. The thrill of the illicit, the sheer audacity of it was intoxicating. He was Richard Sterling. He made the rules. This weekend was not just about pleasure. It was a celebration of his own untouchable status. He was taking his mistress to the most opulent hotel in the city, a place synonymous with the established elite, and he was doing it right under his wife's nose. The sheer arrogance of the act was half the fun. As he held Jessica, the image of Victoria calmly folding his shirts and placing them in his suitcase flashed in his mind. He felt a fleeting, almost imperceptible prickle of something, not guilt, but a faint disquiet. He dismissed it instantly. It was just the last vestige of a conventional conscience, and he had no use for that anymore. The Rolls-Royce Ghost glided to a silent stop beneath the ornate wrought iron and glass canopy of the Grand Elysian. A doorman, dressed in a crisp, dark green uniform with gold epaulets, moved with practiced grace to open Richard's door before he'd even fully registered they had arrived. "Welcome to the Grand Elysian, Mr. Sterling." The doorman said, his voice a deferential murmur. He recognized Richard, or at least he recognized the car and the suit. That was all that mattered. Richard stepped onto the granite curb, feeling the familiar sense of arrival that came with entering such an establishment. This was his natural habitat. He was not a guest here. He was a member of the class of people for whom places like this were built. Jessica emerged from the other side, her eyes wide, as she took in the hotel's facade, a masterpiece of Beaux-Arts architecture, all limestone carvings, grand arches, and soaring columns. She looked momentarily overwhelmed, a small-town girl in the land of giants. Richard found it endearing. He took her arm, his touch firm and reassuring. "Try to look like you belong here," he whispered, with a condescending smile. Her brief insecurity vanished, replaced by a determined sparkle in her eye. She lifted her chin, squeezed his arm, and together they walked through the revolving bronze doors. The lobby was breathtaking. It was a cathedral of wealth. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, adorned with a magnificent fresco of classical gods, lounging on clouds. A colossal crystal chandelier, rumored to have been salvaged from a French palace, hung in the center, casting a warm golden light over everything. The floors were a checkerboard of Italian marble, polished to a mirror shine. The air was thick with the scent of fresh lilies and old money. The hushed sounds of quiet conversations, the distant clinking of glasses from the lobby bar, and the soft strains of a live pianist created a symphony of refined tranquility. Richard strode confidently towards the front desk, a long, imposing counter of polished mahogany. A woman with an elegant chignon and a welcoming smile immediately gave them her full attention. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the Grand Elysian. Richard Sterling," he announced, placing his black American Express Centurion card on the counter. "I have a reservation for the presidential suite." The receptionist's professional smile didn't falter, but Richard saw a flicker of heightened respect in her eyes. The presidential suite was not just a room, it was a statement. It was reserved for royalty heads of state and titans of industry. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. We have been expecting you," she said, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. "Everything is in order. Your luggage will be brought up immediately. We've also taken the liberty of chilling a bottle of Dom Perignon 2008 for your arrival." "Excellent," Richard said, a dismissive nod, his only thanks. He turned to Jessica, who was trying her best to appear nonchalant, but was failing to hide her giddiness. She was subtly taking a photo of the chandelier with her phone. He gently pushed her hand down. "No pictures, darling," he murmured. "It's gauche. You're not a tourist." She flushed slightly but put the phone away. "Right. Sorry. It's just incredible." A bellhop, an older man with a perfectly straight back and a discreet demeanor, appeared at their side. "Mr. Sterling, if you'll follow me, I'll escort you to your suite." They followed him across the expansive lobby, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble. They passed elegantly dressed guests and a quiet army of staff who all seemed to move with a silent, synchronized purpose. The elevator was a wood-paneled jewel box with a plush velvet bench. As it ascended smoothly, the bellhop spoke in a low, respectful tone. "The presidential suite is located on the penthouse floor, sir. It has its own private elevator key for absolute discretion." He handed Richard a heavy gold-plated key card. "You will have a dedicated butler, Mr. Henderson, at your service 24 hours a day. He is already waiting for you upstairs." "Very good," Richard replied, his tone clipped. The elevator doors opened directly into a private vestibule. Double doors of rich, dark wood stood before them. The bellhop unlocked them and pushed them open, stepping aside with a flourish. The suite was even more spectacular than Richard had imagined. It was less a hotel room and more a sprawling penthouse apartment. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic 180-degree view of the city skyline and the park below. A grand piano stood in one corner, a fully stocked bar in another. The furniture was a mix of antique and modern designer pieces, all upholstered in velvets and silks in shades of cream gold and royal blue. Jessica let out a gasp, dropping Richard's arm and spinning around in the center of the room. "Richard, this is bigger than my entire apartment building." He laughed, a rich, self-satisfied sound. "This, my dear, is how the other half lives. No, wait, this is how the other 1% lives." The bellhop gave them a brief tour the formal dining room, the study the master bedroom with its canopied bed, and a bathroom that was a marble sanctuary, complete with a sauna and a jacuzzi tub overlooking the city. After the bellhop had been tipped generously and had departed, Richard walked over to the bar and poured 2 glasses from the chilled bottle of Dom Perignon. He handed one to Jessica, who was standing by the vast window, mesmerized by the view. "A toast," he said, clinking his glass against hers. "To a perfect weekend." "To us?" she replied, her eyes shining with adoration. They drank the expensive champagne, fizzing on their tongues. Richard felt invincible. Everything was perfect. Every detail had been managed, every contingency planned for. In this suite, high above the world, he was untouchable. He had successfully compartmentalized his life, the dutiful wife in the Park Avenue penthouse, the exciting mistress in this palace in the sky. He believed he was in complete control of his universe, a master puppeteer pulling all the right strings. He had no way of knowing that one of those strings, a thread he had long considered, severed and forgotten, was attached to the very foundations of the building he was standing in. The first day was a blur of hedonistic perfection. They ordered room service from a menu that seemed to have no limits, lounged in plush robes, and made full use of the suite's luxurious amenities. Richard felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had earned this. The stress of billion-dollar deals and market fluctuations melted away in the face of such absolute comfort. That evening they dined at La Saphire, the hotel's 3 Michelin-starred restaurant. The maître d' greeted Richard by name, seating them at the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth with a view of the restaurant's private garden. The meal was an elaborate performance of culinary artistry. Course after course arrived, each more exquisite than the last. Richard ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than Jessica's monthly rent, and he savoured the way her eyes widened when he told her the price. He was performing his power for her, and she was the perfect audience. Throughout the evening he regaled her with stories of his corporate triumphs, of deals he had closed, and rivals he had crushed. He painted himself as a modern-day titan, and she listened with rapt attention, her hand resting on his thigh under the table. He felt more potent, more alive than he had in years. This was the validation he craved, the adoration his wife, Victoria, had never quite provided. Victoria's admiration had always been quiet, understated. It was the calm approval of a partner, not the breathless worship of a devotee. The next morning, Richard woke up late, the sun streaming through a gap in the heavy silk curtains. Jessica was still asleep, her blonde hair fanned out across the ridiculously high thread count pillows. He slipped out of bed feeling rested and content. He decided to take a steam in the marble bathroom before ordering breakfast. As he stepped out of the steam shower, he reached for one of the thick, heavy bathrobes hanging on a heated rack. It was impossibly soft, made of the finest Egyptian cotton. He slipped it on and tied the belt, his eyes scanning his reflection in the fog-free mirror. It was then that he noticed it. On the lapel of the robe, embroidered in a subtle, elegant silver thread, was a monogram. It was a D, intertwined with a V. He frowned, tracing the letters with his finger. VD. What did that stand for? He vaguely recalled the name of the hotel manager who had been mentioned, Dubois. Perhaps it was for Vicomte Dubois, a flourish for the hotel's founding family. It seemed plausible. This hotel was steeped in old-world European tradition. Still, it was a strange, specific detail. He shrugged it off. It was just a monogram. He walked back into the main suite robe, cinched tight, and called for their butler, Mr. Henderson, to arrange breakfast. As he waited, his eyes wandered around the room, now taking in the smaller details he had missed in his initial awe. He noticed the stationery on the mahogany desk, heavy, cream-colored cardstock. He picked up a sheet. In the top corner, embossed in the same elegant script as the monogram were the intertwined initials VD. A faint, unidentifiable unease began to stir in the pit of his stomach. It was like hearing a single note off-key in an otherwise perfect symphony. When Mr. Henderson arrived with a trolley laden with their breakfast-smoked salmon, scrambled eggs with truffle-fresh pastries, and silver pots of coffee, Richard decided to ask. Mr. Henderson. He began trying to sound casual. I was just admiring the hotel's branding. These initials, he said, gesturing to the stationery. VD. Is that for the hotel's founder? The butler, a man whose face was a mask of professional discretion, paused for a fraction of a second. The monogram represents the ownership, sir. It has been the hotel's mark for a very long time. The answer was polite professional and told him absolutely nothing. The slight hesitation, however, did not go unnoticed by Richard. He was a man who read people for a living, who could spot a bluff across a boardroom table. The butler was being evasive. "I see," Richard said, letting it drop. But he couldn't let it go. As he ate his breakfast, the letters echoed in his mind. VD. VD. The familiarity of it was maddening. It tickled the edge of his memory, a name or a place he couldn't quite grasp. He thought of Victoria. Her maiden name was Davenport. Victoria Davenport. VD. The thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. He actually put his coffee cup down with a clatter. It couldn't be. It was an absurd coincidence. Her family had been wealthy, yes, but they had lost the bulk of their fortune generations ago. Her father, William, had been a quiet, unassuming man who had passed away a decade ago, leaving Victoria a modest inheritance, which Richard had of course absorbed into his own portfolio and managed for her. He remembered William as a gentleman of a bygone era, always talking about standards and legacy, but seemingly possessing little of actual substance. He had owned a few small boutique hotels, Richard recalled, but nothing on the scale of the Grand Elysian. No, it was impossible. A ridiculous, paranoid leap of logic. There must be hundreds of names that fit those initials. Vanderbilt, Van Doren, de Villiers, all far more likely. He glanced at Jessica, who was happily snapping a picture of her aesthetically arranged breakfast plate for her social media. She was oblivious to his internal turmoil. "Everything okay, Richard? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, finally looking up from her phone. "Fine." He snapped his tone sharper than he intended. "Just thinking about the markets." He forced himself to relax. He was being an idiot. He was at the pinnacle of a perfect weekend, and he was letting a stupid monogram spook him. He was Richard Sterling. He was in control. This was his world, his hotel, his weekend. The initials were a coincidence, nothing more. But for the rest of the day, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He started seeing the monogram everywhere on the tiny silver sugar tongs on the leather-bound menu for room service, on the corner of the linen napkins. Each time he saw it, the image of his wife's calm, serene face flashed in his mind. The woman he thought he knew so well, the woman he had dismissed as simple and predictable. The gilded cage he had built for her suddenly seemed less like a prison and more like a fortress, one he had never bothered to look inside. The unsettling thought crept in, unbidden. What if he didn't know his wife at all? For their final evening, Richard had planned to recreate the magic of the first. He made another reservation at La Saphir, this time requesting the chef's tasting menu with the premium wine pairing. He was determined to shake off the bizarre paranoia that had clung to him since the morning. He would drown his unease in vintage Bordeaux and reaffirm his control. He and Jessica got dressed. He wore a dark tailored suit, and Jessica wore a stunning, backless red dress he had bought for her. As they stood in front of the mirror, he felt a sense of reassurance. They looked like a power couple. They belonged here. The monogram was a ghost, a figment of an overworked imagination. They descended to the restaurant, the private elevator, delivering them once again to the world of hushed elegance. The maître polished Frenchman, named Jean-Luc, greeted them with an even warmer smile than the night before. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure to welcome you back. Your table is ready. The chef is very excited to present tonight's menu for you." They were led to the same secluded booth. Richard settled into the plush velvet, the familiar surroundings comforting him. He ordered a bottle of Krug champagne to start a celebratory gesture meant to banish the last of his foolish anxieties. "You know," Jessica said, leaning forward and placing her hand on his, "this has been the most incredible weekend of my life. I feel like a princess." "You deserve it," Richard said, his confidence returning. He was being ridiculous. This was his life. He made this happen. The first few courses were sublime. A delicate oyster, vichyssoise, followed by seared scallops with a citrus foam. The conversation was light, and Jessica's laughter was like music, washing away the last of his concerns. He was just about to raise his glass to toast their future when he noticed a subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. A quiet energy, a ripple of tension was spreading from the entrance. The staff, usually the picture of calm professionalism, seemed to be standing a little straighter. Jean-Luc, the maître d', was conferring in a hushed, urgent tone with a man in a dark suit who had a security earpiece. Richard watched with mild curiosity. "Looks like some important guest is arriving," he remarked to Jessica. A moment later, Jean-Luc began moving towards their table, his expression a carefully constructed mask of apology and deference. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice low. "My sincerest apologies for this interruption." "Is there a problem?" Richard asked, a hint of irritation in his voice. Before Jean-Luc could answer, the source of the commotion became clear. A small group of people had entered the restaurant and were now standing near the entrance, surveying the room. At the head of the group was a woman. Richard's blood ran cold. The champagne glass in his hand felt suddenly heavy, his fingers numb. It was Victoria. She was not the Victoria he had left at home, the woman in cashmere cardigans and sensible pearls. This was a different creature entirely. She wore a stunningly tailored deep navy blue power suit that accentuated her tall, slender frame. Her hair, usually in a soft chignon, was styled in a sleek, severe cut that framed a face set with an expression of icy calm and absolute authority. Her only jewelry was a pair of large diamond stud earrings that glittered like chips of ice. She was flanked by two men. One was an elderly, distinguished gentleman with silver hair and sharp eyes, a man Richard recognized with a jolt of horror, Arthur Abernathy, the legendary, notoriously ruthless corporate lawyer who had been a close friend of Victoria's father. The other was the hotel's general manager, a man Richard recognized from pictures in the hotel's brochure. They stood slightly behind her, like loyal lieutenants attending their general. Jessica, following Richard's frozen gaze, turned. "Richard, who is that? Do you know her?" she whispered, a confused frown on her face. "She looks a bit like your—" Her voice trailed off as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. Victoria's eyes swept the room, calm and methodical, before they landed directly on their table. There was no shock in her gaze, no surprise. There was only a cool, deliberate recognition. It was the look of a predator that had finally located its prey. The entire restaurant had fallen silent. Diners were frozen forks halfway to their mouths, their quiet conversations dead. The only sound was the soft clinking of Victoria's heels on the marble floor as she began to walk towards them. It was the longest walk of Richard's life. Each step echoed in the cavernous silence, a drumbeat marking the seconds until his world collapsed. His mind raced, trying to form a lie, an explanation, an escape route. But there was none. The carefully constructed walls of his double life were not just cracking. They were being vaporized before his very eyes. He looked at Jessica, whose face had gone pale, her lipstick-red smile frozen in a rictus of terror. He looked at the other diners, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pity. And then he looked back at his wife, who was now just a few feet away. In her eyes, he didn't see the hurt spouse he might have expected. He saw a stranger. He saw a queen who had come to reclaim her throne, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was nothing more than a trespasser in her kingdom. Victoria stopped at their table. She didn't look at Jessica. Her entire focus, cold and undivided, was on Richard. The scent of her perfume, a subtle, expensive fragrance he hadn't smelled on her in years, reached him. It was sharp and clean like winter air. "Richard," she said. Her voice was perfectly level, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice she used when giving instructions to staff, calm and final. "I believe you are in my seat." The statement hung in the air, a masterpiece of double meaning. Richard stared at her, his mouth dry. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. The carefully curated persona of Richard Sterling, the master of the universe, was shattering like cheap glass. "Victoria." He stammered, his mind a blank slate of panic. "What? What are you doing here? I thought you were in New York." The charity gala. A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "I cancelled. Something more important required my attention." Her gaze finally flickered to Jessica, a quick, dismissive glance that took in the expensive dress and the terrified expression. She looked at her, not as a rival, but as one might look at a piece of furniture that was out of place. "And I see you brought a guest." Jessica shrank back in her seat, looking at Richard with pleading, terrified eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Victoria turned her attention back to Richard. "I must say, Richard, I'm impressed. The presidential suite, La Sophia. You have expensive taste. It's a comfort to know you appreciate the family business." The family business? The words hit him like a physical blow, connecting the dreadful dots that had been plaguing him all day. The monogram. V.D. Victoria Davenport. I don't understand," he managed to say, though the truth was crashing down on him with the force of a tsunami. "Let me clarify for you," Victoria said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming even more precise, each word a carefully sharpened blade. "My father, William Davenport, founded Davenport Hospitality Group 60 years ago. His first hotel was a small inn in the countryside. But he was a brilliant man. He built an empire piece by piece with his own hands. The Grand Elysian was his masterpiece, his crown jewel. When he died, he left his entire controlling interest, all of it, to me." She paused, letting the information sink in. The entire restaurant was listening, captivated by the real-life drama unfolding before them. "For 10 years, she continued, I have allowed a board of trustees, hand-picked by my father, to manage the company's day-to-day operations. I preferred a quiet life. I wanted to raise my children. I wanted to be a wife. I trusted that the world my father built was in good hands. And I trusted my husband." Her eyes bored into him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the immense pain he had caused her. But it was immediately suppressed, replaced by a will of tempered steel. "But recently I decided it was time to take a more active role. As of last Monday at the annual shareholders' meeting, I dissolved the board of trustees and assumed my rightful position. I am the sole acting chairwoman of the Davenport Hospitality Group, which owns this hotel and 117 others worldwide. The monogram you've been seeing everywhere, it doesn't stand for Vicomte Dubois. It stands for Victoria Davenport. Welcome to my hotel, Richard." The silence in the room was absolute. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He was not a king in a conquered territory. He was a fool who had thrown a party in the lion's den, unaware the lion was at home. Victoria then turned her steely gaze upon Jessica. "Miss Monroe, is it not?" Jessica nodded, trembling. "You are an analyst at Sterling and Finch Capital, I believe. Sleeping with a senior vice president, your direct superior, is a flagrant violation of your company's ethics clause, not to mention a serious lapse in judgment. Consider your employment terminated. Mr. Abernathy has already been in contact with your firm's head of human resources and its board. I wouldn't bother going into the office on Monday." Jessica let out a small, strangled gasp. Her dream weekend had turned into a career-ending nightmare. Finally, Victoria turned back to the man she had been married to for 15 years. As for you, Richard, our joint bank accounts, which hold the funds from my family's trust that you so generously offered to manage, for me, have been frozen. The locks on the Park Avenue penthouse have been changed. Your belongings are being packed as we speak and will be sent to your office. Don't bother going home. You are no longer welcome there. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a single document, placing it on the table between Richard's plate and his wine glass. These are divorce papers drafted by Mr. Abernathy. My terms are not negotiable. You will find I have been meticulously documenting your indiscretions for the past 3 years. You will sign them, you will walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back, and you will never see our children again without my express supervised consent. If you fight me, I will use the full weight of my resources to destroy not just your career, but your very name. I will make sure the name Sterling is synonymous with humiliation and failure in every financial circle on the globe. Am I clear? Richard could only stare at her, speechless. The woman he had patronized, underestimated, and dismissed as a decorative object had just systematically dismantled his entire life in under 3 minutes in a public forum with the cold precision of a surgeon. With that, she turned. "Jean-Luc," she said to the maître d'hôtel who was standing nearby, pale and rigid, "please see that Mr. Sterling's guest is escorted from the premises, and present Mr. Sterling with the bill for his stay, in full. He will be paying with his personal card." She gave Richard one last, lingering look. It was a look of finality, of an old chapter being closed, and a new one beginning. There was no hatred in it, only a profound and chilling indifference. Then, flanked by her lawyer and the hotel manager, Chairwoman Victoria Davenport, turned and walked out of the restaurant, her posture perfect. Her control absolute, leaving behind the smouldering ruins of the life she had just incinerated. For a long moment, after Victoria's departure, Richard remained frozen, a statue of shock and humiliation. The silence in the restaurant was finally broken by a muffled sob from Jessica. She pushed her chair back, her face a mess of running mascara and disbelief. "My job," she whispered, looking at Richard as if seeing him for the first time, not as a titan of industry, but as the architect of her ruin. You said everything was under control. I thought it was—" He stammered the words, feeling like ash in his mouth. 2 discreet but firm security guards materialized at their table. Jean-Luc the maître d'hôtel approached his face, a mask of professional regret. "Miss," he said softly to Jessica, "if you would please come with us." Jessica looked wildly from the guards to Richard, but he offered no help. He couldn't even meet her eyes. Humiliated, she grabbed her small clutch purse and allowed herself to be led away, her red dress a slash of shame against the restaurant's muted tones. The moment she was gone, Jean-Luc placed a leather-bound bill folder on the table. "Your bill, Mr. Sterling." Richard stared at it. He opened it numbly. The figure inside was astronomical. The suite, the room service, the vintage wines, the chef's tasting menus. It was a sum that would make most people gasp, but for him it should have been trivial. He pulled out his wallet, his hands shaking slightly. He handed Jean-Luc the black Amex. "Here." The maître d' returned a minute later, his expression even more pained. "My apologies, Mr. Sterling. The card has been declined." "What?" Richard scoffed. "That's impossible. Run it again." "We have, sir. 3 times. It appears the account has been suspended." Of course, the joint accounts. Victoria hadn't just frozen them. She'd likely had his supplementary cards cancelled. He fumbled for another card, a corporate visa. "Try this one." Jean-Luc returned again, shaking his head slightly. Also declined, sir. The blood rushed to Richard's face. The other diners were no longer pretending not to watch. Their whispers were a low hum of judgment. He was no longer one of them. He was the evening's entertainment. This is ridiculous. There must be a mistake. Richard blustered his voice, rising. The general manager, the same man who had flanked Victoria, approached the table. His demeanor was no longer deferential. It was cold official. Mr. Sterling, perhaps you have another method of payment. If not, we will have to consider this a matter of theft of services and involve the authorities. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Richard Sterling, a man who moved billions of dollars before breakfast, couldn't pay his hotel bill. The humiliation was absolute. He had no cash, no working cards. He was trapped. Mr. Justice, Abernathy Victoria's lawyer, reappeared at the edge of the dining room. He walked over to the manager, spoke a few quiet words, and then addressed Richard. Mr. Sterling. Abernathy said, his voice like gravel. Mrs. Sterling, that is Miss Davenport, has graciously offered to settle your bill. It will be deducted from whatever minimal settlement you might have hoped for in your divorce. Consider it her final gift to you. He slid the divorce papers closer to Richard. I suggest you sign these. Now. Defeated, Richard picked up the pen. His signature, usually a bold, confident slash, was a shaky, pathetic scrawl. He had been completely and utterly outplayed. Now, the general manager said, his voice hard. You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings and vacate the premises. Security will escort you. The walk of shame from the restaurant, through the grand lobby, and up the elevator was excruciating. Every glance from a guest, every look from a staff member felt like a physical blow. The deference and respect were gone, replaced by contempt and cold indifference. In the suite, his things had already been thrown haphazardly into his suitcase by a stony-faced butler. 10 minutes later, Richard Sterling was standing on the curb outside the Grand Elysian, the same spot where he had arrived, feeling like a king, just 24 hours earlier. The doorman who had greeted him so warmly now stared straight through him. His Rolls-Royce was gone, towed, he assumed, as it was registered in Victoria's name. It started to drizzle a cold, miserable rain. He tried to call an Uber, but his app was linked to his cancelled cards. He stood there, a man in a $1,000 suit with a useless phone and an empty wallet as taxis and limousines swished past. He was stranded. He started to walk, the drizzle soaking his suit jacket. He had nowhere to go. His home was no longer his. His office would be a place of shame. His friends, he knew, would side with power and old money. They would side with Victoria Davenport. News of this spectacular humiliation would travel through their circles at the speed of light. He found a payphone, a relic from another era, and used the few coins he had in his pocket to call his one remaining ally, a junior partner at his firm named Frank. Frank, it's Richard. I'm in trouble. A real mess. He tried to explain, but his story came out as a panicked, incoherent ramble. Frank listened, and when Richard was done, there was a long pause. Richard, Frank said, his voice strained. I just got an email from the board. It's about you. They're calling an emergency meeting Monday morning. Richard, they're invoking the morals clause. Victoria's lawyer sent them a full dossier. Photos, bank statements, everything. They're going to fire you. The receiver slipped from Richard's numb fingers, clattering against the metal of the payphone booth. It was over. All of it. In a single evening, he had lost his wife, his children, his home, his mistress, his job, and his fortune. Victoria hadn't just defeated him. She had erased him. He looked up at the glittering penthouse suite of the Grand Elysian, a beacon of power high above the city. He had flown too close to the sun, never realizing the sun was his wife. And now he was in a freefall with no ground in sight. 6 months later, the world had moved on and Richard Sterling had been left behind. The name that once commanded respect on Wall Street was now a cautionary whisper, a ghost story told to ambitious young associates about the perils of hubris. As Victoria had promised, her victory was not just a defeat for him, it was a complete and total erasure. The emergency board meeting at Sterling and Finch Capital had been a formality, a swift, clinical execution. His office was cleared out before he even had a chance to process his termination. The morals clause a piece of corporate boilerplate he'd never given. A second thought had become the guillotine that severed him from his life's work. His new reality was a suffocating cloak of anonymity and failure. The Park Avenue penthouse was replaced by a third-floor walk-up in a distant borough, a place that smelled of damp and his neighbors' cooking. The floor-to-ceiling windows that had offered panoramic views of the city were now a single grime-streaked pane, looking out onto a graphite-covered brick wall. The silence of his old life, a silence of refined luxury, was replaced by the constant noise of sirens arguing neighbors and the rattling groan of the ancient radiator. He sold the Patek Philippe, then the cufflinks, then the art collection he'd been so proud of each sale, a small death chipping away at the man he used to be, until only a hollow shell remained. He now worked at a small, faceless financial services firm called Apex Solutions, a name so generic it was insulting. His corner office was a cramped cubicle under the glare of flickering fluorescent lights. He who once moved markets with a single phone call now spent his days performing mind-numbing data entry and compliance checks work once done by the interns he never bothered to learn the names of. His boss was a man 15 years his junior, a smug, ambitious graduate who treated Richard with a thinly veiled contempt, fully aware of who he used to be and relishing his fall from grace. Sometimes he would see young women in the office, bright and eager, who reminded him of Jessica, and he would feel a surge of bitter resentment. It was not remorse for her ruined career, but anger that his appetites had led him here. His evenings were the worst. The profound isolation was a physical presence in his small apartment. He'd tried calling old friends the men with whom he'd shared cigars and 100-year-old scotch. The calls went unanswered. The few who did pick up were brief and cool, making excuses before quickly ending the conversation. He was a liability, a social leper. He was no longer a member of the club. He was just a man in a cheap apartment, haunted by the ghost of his former life, the self-pity, a poison he drank every night, along with bottom-shelf whiskey. While Richard was sinking into the mire of his own making, Victoria was ascending. Stepping into her role as chairwoman of the Davenport Hospitality Group, she was not just competent, she was formidable. The years of quiet observation, of being underestimated and dismissed, had forged her into an astute and decisive leader. She saw things the old board comprised of men comfortable with the status quo had missed. One afternoon in the main boardroom on the top floor of the Davenport Tower, she was presenting her flagship proposal, the Davenport Green Initiative. It was a multi-billion-dollar, decade-long plan to make the entire hotel chain carbon neutral, focusing on sustainable sourcing, renewable energy, and community investment. A portly silver-haired board member named Gerald Croft, a holdover from the old guard, and a friend of her father's, cleared his throat condescendingly. Victoria, with all due respect, this is a noble sentiment, but the numbers are idealistic. The upfront investment will slash our profit margins for years. Our shareholders expect dividends, not virtue signaling. Victoria didn't flinch. She met his gaze with her calm, steady eyes. "Thank you, Gerald. I value your traditional perspective." The word traditional was delivered with surgical precision, making it sound synonymous with outdated. She clicked a button, and the screen behind her filled with complex charts and data projections. "What you call virtue signaling, Gerald I call future-proofing. Our key demographic travelers under 40, with significant disposable income, increasingly make choices based on corporate ethics and sustainability. This isn't an expense. It's an investment in our brand's relevance for the next 50 years. My projections show that while we'll see a 5% dip in net profits for the first 18 months, the positive press increased brand loyalty, and government tax incentives will lead to a projected 15% growth in market share within 5 years. We won't just be a luxury brand, we will be the ethical luxury brand." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My father built this company on quality and legacy. This is the legacy for the 21st century. The motion stands." A murmur of approval went through the room. Gerald Croft sank back into his chair, defeated. From the corner, Arthur Abernathy watched, a rare, proud smile on his face. The slumbering titan had well and truly awoken. Her new life wasn't just in the boardroom. The Park Avenue penthouse, once a cold showroom for Richard's success, had been transformed. It was now a home, filled with warmth and laughter. She was there for her children, truly present for the first time. She helped with homework, attended school plays, and had long conversations about their hopes and fears. She was discovering the joy in the small, real moments she had missed while playing the part of the perfect corporate wife. She was not just a chairwoman. She was a mother, a leader, a whole person finally living her own life on her own terms. One crisp autumn evening, Richard was walking home from the subway station, the collar of his thin coat turned up against a biting wind. The city that had once felt like his kingdom now felt alien and hostile. He stopped at a newsstand, the bright glare of the magazines a stark contrast to the grey pavement, and there she was. Her face was on the cover of Forbes. It was a stunning photograph. Victoria stood on the balcony of the Grand Elysian's presidential suite, his suite, the city lights twinkling behind her like a carpet of diamonds at her feet. She looked directly at the camera, an expression of serene power and unshakable confidence on her face. The headline was a coronation, Victoria Davenport, how the quiet heiress reinvented a global empire. His hand trembled as he paid for the magazine. Back in the oppressive silence of his apartment, he sat under the single dim lamp and read the article. It was a hagiography, a glowing tribute to her brilliance. It detailed her sustainability initiatives, her shrewd acquisitions of boutique hotel chains, her employee profit-sharing program. It quoted industry rivals who expressed their grudging admiration. Then he reached the part about her personal life. After an amicable divorce from her former husband, it read, "Davenport has focused on her children and her role as a transformative leader in the hospitality industry, proving that a new chapter can be the most rewarding one." Amicable divorce? The word sparked a harsh, dry laugh in his throat. He wasn't a villain in her story. He wasn't even a footnote. He was a typo that had been corrected, an inconvenient detail completely written out of the narrative. He let the magazine slip from his fingers. It fell to the floor, landing with Victoria's triumphant face looking up at him. He had never really seen her. He had looked at her every day for 15 years and seen only a reflection of his own success, a beautiful passive accessory. He had failed to see the keen mind, the patient heart, and the core of Davenport steel that ran through her veins. He had thought he was the master of his universe, a sun around which everything revolved, but he had only been a minor moon orbiting a star, and he had been foolish enough to think his own dim light was the source of all power. He got up and walked to the window, staring out at the dark, unforgiving brick wall that was his horizon. He pictured her standing in her office at the top of the Davenport Tower, looking out at the endless, glittering expanse of the city, a city that was now hers to conquer. High above, a new dawn had broken for Victoria Davenport, bright and full of promise. For Richard Sterling, left in the darkness below, it was a permanent and deeply deserved dusk. Richard Sterling learned the hardest lesson: of all, the person you underestimate the most can be the one holding all the cards. He saw his wife as a part of his perfect life's decor, only to discover she owned the entire building, and he was nothing more than a temporary guest who had overstayed his welcome. Victoria's story is a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, patient force that waits for the perfect moment to reclaim its power. It's a tale of justice, empowerment, and the spectacular consequences of betrayal. If you were captivated by Victoria's incredible journey from a silent partner to a reigning chairwoman, make sure to hit that like button to show your support. What did you think of Richard's stunning downfall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this story with someone who loves a tale of epic revenge and empowerment. And most importantly, if you want more gripping stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.